Going to get straight into it. We have a powerhouse of a panel today. To help our audience navigate, can each of you briefly define your lane? For example, if I have a digital web series versus a feature film, who should be my first phone call? I guess I'll throw it out to John.
Thanks, Shaista. Great intro. You guys can hear me okay? Yeah, all's good. So I'm John Taylor. I'm the CEO of the Independent Production Fund. Our lane is series. It's scripted series specifically, so we don't do documentary or factual. We don't currently do films. We do scripted, dramatic television series that can be both digital, so self-published to YouTube, or on a unique platform if you have a license, etc. But also to traditional television platforms, broadcast, etc., all the major streamers. So we do digital or we do scripted series, television series.
Thanks, John. Abigail?
Hi, everyone. I'm Abigail Borja, and I'm a coordinator at the Bell Fund. So the Bell Fund is an independent production fund. Like the IPF, we support the development and production of high-quality Canadian stories. And in our development program, we support television series series. So they can be intended for television broadcasting, but they can also be digital first. And we also support one-offs, such as films in development, but they have to be intended for the broadcasting system. Now, when it comes to production, we support series. They can be scripted and non-scripted. And we offer a variety of options regarding who can offer market interest. So these series can be intended for broadcasting, but then they can also be digital series.
Perfect. Thank you, Abigail. Miriam?
Hi, everybody. Good to be here. My name is Miriam Rafla. I am the regional feature film executive for the English market in Quebec. And I oversee the Talent to Watch program, which is probably where my focus will mostly be today. The Talent to Watch program is for first-time features, supporting key creatives in writing, production, and directing. But to give you a broader overview of Telefilm Canada funds feature films. We are involved from concept and development through production, distribution, marketing, promotion, and we do have career development initiatives. So our continuum really does allow filmmakers to come in from concept all the way to delivery. And with the Talent to Watch program, which I'll elaborate on a little later, we're really looking at fostering new talent, first-time filmmakers, and hope to see their track develop so that they can come back into different programs at Telefilm. And that is Telefilm Canada in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thanks, Miriam. Hiba, can you tell us a little bit more from the CAVCO side?
Hi, I'm Hiba Harish. I'm a quality assurance officer at CAVCO. Over at the CAVCO side, we have a much broader eligibility across different production genres and platforms. When it comes to genres, we have a list of ineligible genres, which can be found on our website. As for platforms, fiction, documentary, nonfiction programming, all of that works. It could be, theatrical, television, MOW, different streaming platforms, even online-only productions. So we have a much broader eligibility across the board.
Thanks, Hiba. Megan, can you tell us a little bit more about from the Canada Council of the Arts?
Hi, I'm Megan Ludzik. I'm a program officer for the Canada Council for the Arts, and I work specifically with the Artistic Creation Grant. I'm one of many officers that handle media arts applications. We consider film projects under our umbrella of media arts. And our artistic creation grants are your one-stop shop, essentially, for any film projects. You could apply for any phase of your project from the beginning, middle, or end. And we don't have any parameters on the type of project that you propose. So it could be a short, medium, or feature-length project, and it could be in any genre. So the things to keep in mind is that we tend to do peer assessment committees, so it'll be fellow artists from around the country that are reviewing your application. And a few little notes on media arts projects and our specific restrictions is that we do not accept works that are intended for the commercial industries of film, television, or video games. And they have to be essentially independent, artist-driven works. So only the director can apply. Producers and production companies are not eligible to apply on behalf of creative projects. And if it's an animation project, the principal animator should be the one applying. And a last little note is when you accept the grant, you have to attest that you own and control the work. And a little last point is you can apply in both French and in English.
Thanks, Megan. Janine, if you want to tell us about CMF.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Janine Steele, Director for Interactive, Digital, and Emerging Media at the Canada Media Fund, as mentioned. My specialty is in the IDM sector, but I have worked for many years across all forms of media, including film and television, so I'll talk from that background. So the Canada Media Fund is the largest producer of screen-based media in Canada, and we're funded in part by Canadian Heritage and partly by industry through broadcast regulations. So we're sort of quasi-government, I like to say, public and private. We primarily support series, one-offs, and films for broadcast. That's our core mandate, is to catalyze the broadcast industry. This can include 4 primary genres: drama, documentary, children's and programming, and variety or performing arts. But we also support, through our interactive and digital media funding programs, social media content creation, video podcasting, games, and other interactive immersive content, such as extended reality, virtual reality, or location-based experiences. We have over 20 programs available across this phase of work, from your initial idea through to distribution. Rules and regulations are quite varied across these programs, but generally we're sort of split between linear content production and, as I say, interactive or digital media content production. So for example, short form series, web series, digital series, those fall under our linear content guidelines and are subject to a lot of the broadcast regulations and requirements that exist within those programs. However, social media content and video podcasting fall under our IDM programs, and so have different rules and regulations that apply to them.
Thanks, Janine. I guess the next question is to everybody on the panel. A technical but vital question. Does an applicant need to be a permanent resident or a citizen to access your funds, or are there any opportunities for those that are currently on work permits or in the process of settling? I guess I'll start with you, John.
Thanks, Shaista. Yeah, and this is a good question for everyone. The IPF follows generally CRTC rules, CAVCO rules, CMF rules about what the definition is of a Canadian individual. Currently, a Canadian individual is a citizen or a permanent resident. So if you don't have that status and you're not a citizen, you're not eligible. There's potentially ways you could partner. They may seem obvious, but you can work with an existing producer who does have citizenship or status. Of course, there's trade-offs with that. You're partnering, which means your IP ownership. If it's your creative works and you're the writer, you're now in a partnership, and the majority ownership has to go to the applicant company, to us. That's the IPF point of view. Like I said, we're one of the smaller. We're in many ways finance completion for some of the bigger projects. We are a place you may start. We can talk about our programs more with more questions. We do have emerging programs, but in all that case, you have to be a Canadian citizen or at least partnered with a Canadian citizen production company. I'll make one note and then I'll let other answers, is that in the case of the IPF, an individual doesn't apply. It's a Canadian company that applies. So the people that are attached are very relevant. The writer has to be a Canadian citizen or the producer has to be a Canadian citizen, but the actual applicant to us to the IPF is a company. It's a Canadian-owned production company, majority-owned, so that means 51% or more. Co-pros are allowed, but that majority ownership has to stay in Canada.
Perfect. Thank you, John. I guess we go to Abigail.
So similar to the IPF, an applicant to the Bell Fund is a Canadian company, so not an individual. But then also for a project to be eligible to the Bell Fund, it must qualify to obtain a Canadian content certification by the CRTC or CAVCO. And we follow their definition of what Canadian content would be considered. Then again, producers may partner with no Canadians, but then the applicant would be the Canadian company. And for a team, some key creative positions may be filled out by individuals that don't have permanent residency or they're not Canadian, so a writer, for instance. But again, it depends on what is stated in the CRTC or CAVCO guidelines.
Thanks, Abigail. That's a great segue into CAVCO. Hiba.
Perfect. I was thinking the same thing. So at CAVCO, we co-administer 2 tax credits with the CRTC. The first one, I'll start with the Canadian Film or Video Production Tax Credit, which is better known as the CPTC. In a nutshell, yes, the applicant must be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident of Canada, the applicant production company. So how it works is the production company applying for certification must be considered a qualified corporation under the Income Tax Act. What that means is the company must be a prescribed taxable Canadian corporation. It must be primarily in the business of producing Canadian film or video productions. It's important to note here that the producer, co-producer, and line producers must all be Canadian citizens or permanent residents of Canada. For our second tax credit, the PSTC, which is the Film or Video Production Services Tax Credit, the copyright owner, who generally is a non-Canadian but can be Canadian, the copyright owner would apply for accreditation through CAVCO, or any eligible production corporation working on the production can apply for the tax credit using the CAVCO certificate. That company must be a taxable Canadian corporation with a permanent establishment in Canada. And they also must be primarily in the business of producing film and video productions.
Perfect. Thank you, Hiba. Miriam, what about Telefilm?
So yes, at Telefilm, you're coming in with a company. The company needs to be a recognized Canadian entity, and we comply with CAVCO and CRTC, so certification is absolutely necessary in order to access the funds. In the programs, you can come in with registered companies and incorporate once a project has been recommended. But in all cases, yes, we're looking at Canadian citizenship or permanent residence who can apply in the key creative roles as writer, director, producers. And of course, we do have co-production, minority and majority co-production programs where that would shift. But at all times, the lead applicant at Telefilm Canada is coming in as a Canadian company, Canadian entity, and always complying with CAVCO and CRTC. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Miriam. What about Janine at the CMF?
Yes, I think similar to the other funders, my answer is going to sound very much the same. All of our programs do require some form of Canadian ownership and control, as well as, to be certified by CRTC or CAVCO. In limited cases, this can include permanent residency, but it is in limited cases. I think one important thing to note for the Canada Media Fund is that in our linear production programs, the bar for those Canadian content points is actually generally a bit higher due to demand. So you're required to have, in order to access our programs, generally 10 out of 10 Canadian content points, which does have an impact when you think about who your key creative personnel are. There are exceptions when it comes to international co-productions. Don't necessarily recommend taking that on as a first project, but it is an opportunity to kind of look at those rules and work with individuals from a variety of countries. The other thing to note, as John mentioned earlier, most of our programs also require you to have an incorporated production company before applying to us. The primary exception for this is our Digital Creators Pilot Program, which I'll talk a little bit further on later on. But in that program, you can apply as an individual and are only required to incorporate should you be successful in the selective process.
Perfect. Thank you, Janine. Megan, for Canada Council for the Arts.
All right, it's going to sound a little different. We have a few different requirements. So if you are applying with us, you're the director, so you're applying as an individual. For that, we call it an artist or an arts worker. It's the type of account you're applying with. These requirements are that you're either a Canadian citizen living in Canada or abroad, either you're First Nation, Inuit, Métis. Applicants are also accepted, permanent residents, as well as protected persons of Canada as defined by Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada. To kind of play off of what the others have been saying regarding Canadian content requirements, we actually do not have any Canadian content requirements for our applications, and you are free to work with whoever you want to work with on your project. So that's the short and sweet answer for it.
Perfect. Thank you, Megan. This is, again, open to everyone. For many in our audience, they may not have a production company or it may be brand new. Do your programs require a track record of past Canadian productions, or are there any emerging artist streams that specifically, are for that first Canadian project? I guess we can start with Abigail this time. Or John, if you want to go.
I'm happy to go with Abigail.
Okay, there we go.
We can switch it up. So for the Bell Fund, our programs don't require a track record of Canadian projects. If anything, newcomers are encouraged to highlight projects they have worked on before arriving to Canada. What we're looking for primarily, or one of the things we're looking for in our programs, is a company's ability to successfully deliver the project. So that means that we're looking at the producers and the team's experience with a specific genre, or in the space of like television broadcasting or web series, depending on what's applicable to the project they're applying for. And we also care about the team being well positioned to tell a story. So in that case, for example, newcomers' experiences outside of Canada may be seen as an asset depending on the content that they are proposing. So for example, if you're proposing a documentary and you have specific access to a community that is outside of Canada, so that is encouraged and it's important to highlight in your application, that may give you a leg up. Or for example, that you have lived experience that informs your ability to tell a story in a unique way or bring new perspectives to this story. So in a nutshell, there is no requirement to have previous Canadian experience.
I'll go next. So we're a good fit. One of our programs is a good fit. We have a web series program, a short form series program for development. It's very popular. It's oversubscribed, several hundred applications each year, and we only have the funding to fund development for about 20. But the good news is there's no requirement for you to have been on television before or delivered a product before. There's a minimum requirement, which is that you've made a short film, something a little bit more than a student film, but the bar is very low in terms of experience. The complicated part, and as this question was about eligibility, so that's an eligibility statement. The next thing you have to think about is competitiveness. And so just to give you hints about applications, while you may meet the minimum eligibility experience in a program that's highly oversubscribed, like ours and many others, it's important for you to be competitive. And so good applications do the work to get people attached to their programs, to their projects, even if they're the creator and they don't have the experience. We've seen now emerging teams coming and they've done a good job to work their network and attach someone, a more senior writer who has more experience than them, or a producer has a bit more experience than them, to be part of their team. They're still the owner in the lead, but they've beefed their team up to be more competitive at that particular phase of application. So when you think about eligibility, that's one thing. But when a program is very highly subscribed, like ours, competitiveness is something you have to think about, at which point adding people to your team that have experience is actually a smart thing to do.
That's super helpful, John. I remember I had to wrap my head around when I moved, and I was like, there's a whole process in putting applications together, which we'll get into further in our chat. Who wants to go next? Megan?
All right. For us to be able to apply for a grant, I think I briefly touched on this earlier. You essentially create an account on our website, and then you have to select a profile, which is basically identifies the type of applicant that you are. So as an individual, you would be an artist or arts worker. There's quite a few requirements, but I'll stick to some key requirements that we're looking for, which is that you have developed your art skills through formal or informal learning. You have been compensated in a manner that is appropriate for your arts practice and region, and accomplished one of the following. Maintained an artistic practice for at least 1 year and completed at least 2 artistic activities that were made available to the public, or worked in a arts role for at least 12 months, not necessarily consecutive. And important little caveat, we do count activities that are done outside of Canada, so it doesn't have to be Canada strictly experience. Um, However, we do not count activities that were carried out to satisfy a course requirement. So, if it was part of your degree. I will note that since we are a federal funder of the arts, we fund more than just film. So you might qualify for this in any of the other fields of practice that we fund. So literature, theater, circus arts, even. If you do have that experience, you might qualify for the profile and apply for grants. And it also means you can apply for project in those other fields as well. So we're happy to welcome people who are doing switches in their artistic career.
Absolutely love that, Megan. Miriam, was there anything at Telefilm?
Yes, so we have several programs, Talent to Watch being usually the entry point for first-time filmmakers. But we do see first-time filmmakers come in to low budget, big budget, theatrical doc. They're all programs where we fund productions. And when looking at track records, and it is a key element of the application, we're looking at relevant experience. So absolutely, if you've made a film that's outside of Canada, that is something that is relevant to your career path and your overall developing body of work. So individual track records, but also key creatives. So we were always talking about writer, director, producer, and how that team comes together. I think, as John mentioned, creating a robust team. If you're a first-time filmmaker coming in with a producer who's got perhaps a more developed track record to be able to support you through the process of this first-time film. So it's something that we do weigh heavily in our evaluations when looking at projects, both on an individual at an individual level, but also as a team. Is this a strong, robust, coherent team moving forward? And does it make sense for the project that's being proposed? I'll give a further detail on Talent to Watch when we get to that particular program, because the track record for that program is quite specific in terms of eligibility. Otherwise, I would say eligibility is quite broad with our other programs, where you could come in for a big budget first and be a first-time director, which is not the case for Talent to Watch. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Miriam. Janine?
So yes, once again, I think my answers will be fairly similar to some of my colleagues in other programs. What I would say, we do not have a set program for emerging creatives at the CMF. But what I often say when it comes to our linear programs, the first rule is that CMF is not actually your first stop. And that's because our linear content programs require what we call a market partner. So that's a Canadian broadcaster or a distributor who's expressed interest in working with you and is providing an advance or a license fee. And that actually unlocks our financing. So while it's not a requirement for us per se that you have a track record, it is going to be subject to what your market partner is looking for and how you pitch to them. However, in our IDM programs, which are mostly selective, similar to what John said, while previous experience may not be a requirement of the program, it often comes into play in terms of being competitive in those selective processes. I also wanted to quickly shout out our industry development programs, where we support dozens of nonprofit organizations or film festivals that are putting on workshops, training opportunities, and events for emerging creatives. These are things like the Toronto Asian Film Festival or the Documentary Organization of Canada, the Racial Equity Screen Office, Real World. I so very much encourage you to look at your wider network and wider events in the industry. Often the CMF is a partner in those events to support your emerging work.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Janine. All of this is so helpful. The Hiba, I'm going to move on to you. Many newcomers hear about tax credits, but they don't really understand where it fits. And could you, speak to that a little bit more and explain the basic requirement for a project to be considered Canadian in the eyes of CAVCO?
Sure. So I know I only have a few minutes to do this, and I'm going to say it's a bit hard to squeeze it in 3 minutes. So I'll be as quick as I possibly can. First things first, the applicant production company must be Canadian, as I already covered, must be a qualified corporation. We have deadlines that are important to keep in mind. When you apply with CAVCO, there's a Part A certificate and a Part B certificate. There are no deadlines for the Part A, but there are deadlines for the Part B. It's important to consult our guidelines. I suppose I should have started with that. It is important to read our guidelines before you apply with CAVCO in any event. So the guidelines will explain further the deadlines. The Part B deadlines are calculated using the commencement of principal photography date and the fiscal year end of the corporation. Next eligibility requirement is the key creatives. So you must obtain 6 out of 10 points. To obtain a point, the key creative in question must be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident of Canada, and they must have a CAVCO ID. They apply to us for CAVCO IDs. Important to note for all producers hiring any key creatives or any producer-related individuals, make sure that they have CAVCO IDs and ask for them upfront. Producer, co-producer, line producer must be Canadian. If you're giving any exemptions to non-Canadians, like any executive producer credits, for example, make sure they fill affidavits. Make sure you have parity between Canadian versus non-Canadian credits. Again, more details on that are available in our guidelines. I wish I had more time to give you all the details, but I don't. In terms of genres, I already mentioned we have a list of ineligible genres also on our website. Copyright of the production must be held only by the production company, the Canadian production company, or a prescribed person. In terms of costs, we have a minimum cost threshold. Within our Part B application, there is a breakdown of costs section. When you plug in all your numbers in the breakdown of costs section, it calculates those costs. And 75%, at least 75% of production costs must be Canadian, and at least 75% of post-production costs must be incurred in Canada. Again, that's one of our eligibility requirements. Next, production must be fully funded. And we will be providing you with a takeaway document at the end of this session. Within the takeaway document, we have examples of different sources of funding, what is considered assistance for our purposes and what is considered not assistance. It is important to be aware of which is which, because any sources of funding that are considered assistance will impact the calculation of the tax credit or the estimate that we will be providing you with. Next eligibility requirement is the Shown in Canada requirement. We require a written commitment from a CRTC licensed broadcaster or a Canadian distributor that the production will be shown in Canada within the first 2 years that it becomes commercially exploitable. In cases where of a distribution by a related party or where only a distribution agreement is provided for a series or a movie of the week, CAVCO may ask for further information about where production will be shown, and we might ask for sub-distribution license agreements, etc. Our online only policy, so a production can be shown online only. However, it must be the production company must sign a distribution agreement with a Canadian distributor, and then the Canadian distributor can sign a deal with the online only exhibitor. We have a list online. You can just Google CAVCO list of acceptable online service providers, and on there you'll be able to see all of these service providers that are acceptable, that we have so far that are acceptable. If the service provider that you want to contract with is not on that list, right on that web page, there are instructions of how they can apply to become on that list. So we are always updating that list. And the online service provider themselves, they have to apply. The applicant production company cannot apply on their behalf. Next and last point I want to mention is distribution. A production cannot be distributed in Canada within the first 2 years by a non-Canadian entity. So if you want to make a deal with a non-Canadian distribution company and you want to give them rights in Canada, those rights have to commence 2 years after the production has become commercially exploitable.
That's great, Hiba. We're going to make sure all of that is in this takeaway document, so don't worry about losing out on any information. We're going to make sure we have all of it in there. My next question will be for Miriam and for Megan. Telefilm and Canada Council often support, different types of visions. How should a creator tailor their language when applying for these art-based grants versus a commercially driven fund, just off of John's point as well, how you build these applications and beef them up?
All right, I'm going to start us off. I think one key thing that's really important when you're applying, I think with any one of us, is it's very important to read the guidelines. And for us, you'll notice that the assessment criteria is included on every single application, and that gives you an idea of how your application is going to be evaluated. So we were talking about, artistic versus commercial arguments. For the grant called Artistic Creation, 50% of your score is based on the artistic elements of your project. So if you go into the application and only talk about the commercial side of things, about how you're getting your work out there, you are going to get scored on that. That is one of our criteria that we score on, but it isn't the bulk of your score. So you also have to keep in mind that the people that are going to be sitting around the table making the decisions on these grants are fellow artists, filmmakers, maybe they program for a film festival. That sort of people are sitting around the table and reviewing your application. So it's your peers. And we really believe in peer assessment. They tend to react really well to, hearing your motivations behind the projects. Why are you pursuing it? Why is it important for you to do this now? Your inspiration or your drive behind the project. It's really important to paint, wow, a clear picture about what you're trying to accomplish with your work. So that kind of talks a little bit to the artistic elements that you're going to be discussing in your application. And then you're also, of course, including samples of your previous work. So that also helps in giving you some points towards that artistic score. We also score the impact of the project, so impact on your artistic practice and career, and potential of the project to benefit artists, participants, audiences, and communities. So we're looking to hear about maybe you're going from shorts to features, and how is this going to be a progression for you? Maybe you're involving people within certain communities within your project. I mentioned before, obviously getting your work out to the public is important, and you are scored for that in your impact score. So talk about your plan to get it out there. There isn't any expectations of hitting certain numbers. There's obviously just a plan to get it out into the public. We obviously do not want it to be collecting dust on a bookshelf anywhere. And another criteria that we assess is like feasibility, which I think is pretty standard. You know, your capacity to take on the project, having a realistic timeline, a detailed budget, and making sure that everybody's getting paid fairly, including yourself. So, yeah, very important to look at the assessment criteria. This happens to be the one for artistic creation, which is the grant where you're applying for creative projects. We have other grants that obviously have different assessment criteria. So, it's really important to pay attention to the shifts and what's required for each application.
Yeah, we follow similar lines. For most of our program, for all the production programs, we assess creative materials, uh, track record, project viability, audience engagement, and community engagement. So that is pretty much any program you're coming into, we will assess the project accordingly. We have internal committee members, and we also engage external committee members for each of the programs. I think the program that's probably of most interest to this audience is the Talent to Watch program, where we fund first-time filmmakers, so first-time scriptwriter for feature, first-time producer, and first-time director. And that's the key creative team that we're assessing with projects coming in. It's a highly competitive program. The last few years, we've received over 150 applications, and we fund no more than 20, and that is across English market, French market, Indigenous market across Canada. It's a national program. And what we look at, and I think another thing that's worth noting here is that it's the only grant at Telefilm where you can apply for a grant. Every other program is an investment. So you're coming in for documentary or fiction works. We fund up to 100% of the budget with a cap of 500K. And we offer 150K for documentary and 250 for feature films. We are always looking at the screenplay. That's really primes in the assessment. Is it production ready? That's the first thing that we're kind of questioning once the project is being evaluated, and the quality of the vision and articulation of a director's vision. For Talent to Watch, we're looking at first-time filmmakers. It's a program where we like to take a little bit of risk. We're looking at a unique vision, unique stories, and kind of a signature kind of a signature to the project itself. The assessment really relies on the creative elements and the articulation of the creative elements. And then we will look at, again, as I mentioned, the coherency of the track record, community and audience engagement, what is the life of the project once it is released. We do look at more commercial elements in all of our programs, and of course, distribution and marketing interest is key. But when it comes to Talent to Watch, we just want to make sure we're going to get a great film that's going to get up to festivals, and then we'll generate, market interest throughout its journey, its release journey. So that's the criteria we're looking at when we're looking at projects that are coming into Talent to Watch.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Miriam. The next one will be for John and Abigail. So John, for a newcomer writer-director who doesn't have a producer yet, does the IPF offer resources or networking to help them find a production partner who understands the Canadian funding landscape?
It's a really important question. It's one we get a lot. The short answer is no, we're not in the role. Our role is to finance the project. Not to matchmake writers and producers together. We do sponsor, we fund through our industry development, festivals and industry events across Canada. Last year, we funded something, at least one thing in every province and territory across Canada. And that's not just us. Many of the folks on this call are funding or sponsoring these events. And those are critical, and they don't have to for you to find your team. You know, film and television is a team sport. And writers are a great example where we might be used to writing solo, or you know, if you're not in a writer's room and the idea is in its genesis stage, but it doesn't really take action until you find that team and find that the folks around you that are going to support through the application process. So the matchmaking happens before the application process, and we don't facilitate that. We do facilitate all sorts of industry events, and they don't have to be expensive ones. It doesn't mean you have to sign up to go to, you know, all the stuff at TIFF, which might be too expensive and overwhelming. We've seen teams come through our program and they met at Run and Gun in Vancouver. You know, it's one of those 24-hour, you could do a 24-hour film festival. There's Blood in the Snow in Ontario is a great example. There's festivals and industry events happening, big and small, across Canada, and people are finding matches for them, creative matches, production matches. The other thing I would say is another reason why we don't play that role is because it is really bespoke. It's really unique to each team, and it takes a couple tries for you, the creator, the writer, to find that match of the producer. When it clicks, it clicks. And it just takes trial and error, and that's something that's personal to you. What I would say is I have to encourage you. It's one of the most important parts, and also sometimes one of the more daunting parts. But working and growing your social network is a very important part of your first step. And in many ways, that's the homework you do before you come to us, before you come to our funds. So it's not something we facilitate, but it's something we secondhand facilitate through industry events.
Perfect. Thanks, John. Abigail for Bell Fund.
So everything that John said applies to the Bell Fund as well. So no, we do not facilitate these connections. And like part of what we're looking for is we're looking for companies that are able to assemble that team. Like the Bell Fund is really competitive. And we want you to demonstrate to us that you have the skills to put together a cohesive team and a strong team for your project. But so what I usually do when applicants ask me about where do I find these producers, or when writers and creatives ask me about where to find these producers, is I direct them to our annual report. So for us, every year we publish all the projects and all the companies that we funded. So that's a good place to see if there are people you would like to work with. You can identify in what genre they work in. You could also see potentially connections with broadcasters that they have, because that's where their projects are available. And also another important skill that these companies will have is that they have successfully applied for funding, right? So that's what I usually recommend. And these annual reports are available on our website.
That's a great little hot tip. I love that. Next one will be for Janine at CMF. So many people think that digital media just means uploading a video on YouTube, but the CMF IDM stream is looking for innovation. Could you clarify what makes the project interactive enough for this stream? Is it enough to have a social media component, or are you looking for more deeper tech integration like branching narratives or VR?
Absolutely. So this is part of why my title includes interactive and digital. We do sort of approach them in different ways, and I'll get into that. So for the majority of our funding in the IDM space, interactivity is a key component of eligibility. And this means the user is impacting how the content is consumed, often through a digital platform or a device. So this most commonly looks like video games, but we also finance using any number of immersive technologies, might be headset-based, physical installations, dome experiences, as well as software tools that are targeted to the cultural sector, say video editing platforms. So in general, under these programs, we prioritize projects designed for wide consumer release that have commercial or audience potential in Canada or around the world, or demonstrate an innovation in its content, its use of technology, or its business opportunities. We look to the applicants to tell us what innovation means to them in these scenarios. But when we talk about innovation at large at the CMF, we do get really excited by emerging technologies and spaces. And so there might be projects that are operating in these margins that may not be eligible in our core IDM or linear programs. So we might focus on them through a dedicated program for them. One example of that is our pilot program for social media content creation, the Digital Creators Program. This is an initiative where we're looking for mid-level creators who are posting exclusively to platforms like YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, or Facebook. And new this year is we've also opened it up to podcasters that are on those primary platforms, Spotify, YouTube, and Apple. So creators with some past experience in these spaces can apply to us for up to $40,000 to grow their businesses. So say they want to expand their audience on a particular platform or advance from one platform to another. This is a business development program, so it doesn't cover production costs, but it does cover activities that you need to grow your business. That might include hiring staff, marketing or legal services, studio equipment setup, or travel. This program, the decisions are selective and competitive and set on by a jury of sector experts.
That's really great, Janine. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to open this up to everybody now and end it on a little bit of a rapid fire. If there's one unspoken rule about the Canadian funding system that you wish every newcomer knew before they hit the submit button on an application, what would it be? John, we're going with you.
I'll just go, I'll think of it quick, but one tip I would say is that applying for funds, which is a great opportunity, Canada, is actually a skill set. It was explained to me once by an actor friend that they realized to be a successful actor, they had to be good at auditioning, which was a different skill set. And so I would say the same with television and filmmaking in Canada. There's a different skill set applying for funds, and getting good at that is an important step to your success. And it's different than being a great writer, a great director, a great producer, because it's a unique skill set and it takes practice and it takes attention to detail and all of the things. But that's one thing. It's not the same. And being a great writer or being a great producer is a benefit, but it's not the entire piece of applying for funds.
Perfect. Thanks, John. Janine?
Absolutely. I would say sort of to build upon that, I really encourage people to recognize that you are the expert in your content, in your project, and the passion that you have for your project, making sure that that comes through, as well as a really strong sense of self, both for yourself and your project. You are going to be your best advocate, so don't hesitate to pump yourself up a little bit when you're writing these things. On the flip side of that, I often also will say, please don't take a no personally. We're very, very lucky in Canada. There's lots of funding opportunities. It also means that we are a magnet for great, great stories and great, great talent. And so it can take years. A project's in development for years, not necessarily because it needs to be in that writing stage, but because it's taking time for the financing to come together. So, ask for feedback, address what makes sense to the core of what you know your story is, and then try again. That's the best thing you can do.
Thanks, Janine. Miriam?
Yeah, I think as an extension of what John and Janine are saying, be ready. Be ready with the application, that the application is coherent in its articulation, in its vision, in its budget proposal. And especially for Talent to Watch, because Talent to Watch, you can only come in once with a project or with the same project. So the teams could come back with new projects, but really that project gets one chance. And often, in my discussions with filmmakers as they're getting ready for their applications, I often say, if your gut is already telling you there's something not ready, wait till the following year. The year goes by quickly. It gives you the opportunity to hone, develop, sharpen, the screenplay, the package. And yes, it's a talent in and of itself to, work through the funding system in Canada, and a talent to watch. We have a mentorship program. We have a great team of business affairs who really shepherd the new teams coming in with their projects. And what's wonderful about that program is it really introduces you to the inner works of Telephone Canada and how to prepare for your next project moving forward. So producers play a key role, and you're getting into bed with them, and so know who you're working with, trust them, and build that team, and secure that ground moving forward.
That's great, Maria. Hiba, do you have any words for us?
Yes. So our advice would be, or my advice would be, please read our guidelines before you apply. Reach out to us. We're here to help you. If you have any questions, if you're not clear on anything, please reach out to us. I mentioned earlier, make sure the company is incorporated, the applicant production company. Make sure you have those CAVCO IDs. And if you're giving out credits, I mean, don't give them out willy-nilly, but if you're giving out EP credits, etc., make sure you have affidavits, make sure you know the rules behind all of that, and read our guidelines. That's once again.
Yes, we will. We'll send them away. And Megan.
I'm gonna echo Hiba here and say if it's your first time applying, please contact us, read the guidelines. I'll throw in there that for us, we recently updated our website and our guidelines, and we've integrated helpful hints in the guidelines, which I say are mandatory reading, because it includes a lot of useful information to help you address like common mistakes that we often saw in applications. And it also gives you some guiding questions like prompts to help you thoroughly answer the questions, because some of them are pretty general, like describe your activity. That can mean a lot of things. It's very general because we have everybody in every field applying for every project essentially. So the overall can be a little general sometimes. But another last little tip I'll include is to think of your application as like a self-contained bubble where we need to know absolutely everything necessary to understand you and your project. I always say context is very, very important when submitting an application, at least to Canada Council, because you need to explain your circumstances, your project, everything to multiple people from different parts of the country, from various different backgrounds. So you need to get them all on the same page because you do not want them to fill in the blanks because they will come to different conclusions, right? So they don't know what you don't tell them. So please provide that information in your application so we can, support your project.
Thank you so much, everyone. This has been so insightful, and I really wish we could keep going on the panel. And I apologize, we won't be able to get through all of the audience questions, but we will take one. I'm going to throw this to everyone again. How can newcomers collaborate with Canadian production companies, projects, or citizens to still be a part of the projects in a creative or producing capacity? If anyone wants to answer this.
I can start.
Okay.
I don't mind starting. I mean, by newcomers, I'm going to assume not Canadian citizens and not permanent residents of Canada. And if that is the case, they cannot be collaborating in a producing, as far as we're concerned, in a producing capacity. Producer must be Canadian. Producer, co-producer, line producer must be Canadian. Key creatives, you must obtain 6 out of 10 points. And if you're going to hire somebody who is not Canadian, not paying taxes in Canada, you have to keep in mind the 75% minimum Canadian costs. So that's what I would say. It's important to sort of like do your homework, make sure you're in line with those things. And if you want to work with somebody who is not Canadian, I mean, you can, but you have to keep these things in mind.
We have the same answer. We follow the CAVCO rules, the CBAF rules, because it only makes sense instead of creating our guidelines on an island. we assume you would like to achieve tax credit status. So it's the same, which means the newcomer would likely be in a writer position, and then just be mindful of 75% spend in Canada.
Thanks, Sean. Did anyone, Miriam? Okay, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I mean, again, we also align with CAVCO and CRTC, so that is a reality when it comes to a fully 100%, Canadian production. There is possibility for co-production, and there are, it's not the producer, but director writer could possibly come from elsewhere, and as long as they comply and the producer is and the production company is 100% Canadian, there is an opening there. Yeah.
Megan or Janine?
I'll jump in that, as I mentioned earlier, we have a little bit more flexibility at council that, beyond Canadian citizens and permanent residents, if you're a protected person as well, you're eligible to apply. As it relates to working on other projects, I mentioned earlier, we don't have any restrictions on who you work with on those projects. So if you happen to be working with somebody who gets a Canada Council grant to make a film, there are no restrictions on who they hire or collaborate with on those projects. So that's welcome from us. But I think a few people have mentioned this as well. We do not provide any matchmaking services, essentially. So it'll be up to you kind of talking to people within your community, maybe different associations and organizations to see if you can match up and meet up with people that are working on films and hopefully, work on those projects. But we do not provide that connection for people.
And maybe I'll just add, because I think my answer will likely echo. And as I mentioned earlier, we do have generally a higher barrier in terms of Canadian content points for programs, linear programs financed. So one, I would say, look at our other programs. If you are working in the IDM sector, we have a 75% spend in Canada, but not the same requirements of Canadian content certification. The other piece that I'll say is, in your particular situation, I would highly recommend reaching out to our program administration team. We work with Telefilm Canada, who administers all of CMF's programs. They are rock stars. They do this every day, and they are there for you to help determine eligibility on your individual projects. So please give them a call and talk to them about it.
Yeah, I would just like to add the coordination team is very strong and can really help guide you, but also provincially look at different associations, just bouncing off what Megan was saying, different associations that might have mentorship programs, career starter, programs and frameworks that would definitely help at least provide guidance, allow you to connect to community, and people are quite generous with sharing information and experiences. So that's something that could definitely help at least, guide you initially.
Thank you to all of our lovely panelists. This has been so helpful. And thank you, for sharing all the insights and hot tips that we've discovered throughout the day. Now we're going to go on to Marushka, who's going to talk to us about, financing available to emerging producers and her process, who's been through all of this. Hey, Marushka.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Just to introduce myself, I'm Marushka Almeida. I'm a writer-producer who immigrated to Canada in 2018 and got PR in 2023. I've been staffed since then on a bunch of different television shows, currently on a very fun one to be announced for Crave. And I even have my own digital series on CBC Gem. And I've been funded by IPF, Canada Arts Council, the Bell Fund, CMF, Ontario Creates, just to brag a little bit. It is really, really difficult, as everyone has said, and grant writing is a process, and especially for us like newcomers who are still getting used to the system. But my piece of advice, the big one, is really to find your people that everyone has already talked about today. It is of the utmost importance. I think how I was able to get funding through IPF is having two producers with me who were Canadian. So it was a majority Canadian company, even though I was the non-Canadian in the mix. Similarly, the connections that we had attached to the project while applying for IPF and Ontario Creates were all my connections that I'd made before we even decided to apply. So while I didn't have the Canadian status, I did have the development executive, the story editors, all of the connections that you need to be able to package something like that. And that just comes from meeting people, from knowing who's out there, and it comes from being completely shameless of like, hey, this is the production company. Here's the coordinator on like coordinator's email. Reach out and have coffee with the people who are lower on the list, and you can build connections with them because they're gonna grow. They're gonna like be promoted and grow up. So you're building your network from the ground up. Also, people who are lateral to you, people who are in the same boat as you are, who are in the same level as you are, because you're all going to come up together, and it just helps to know that each other exists and keep each other motivated. So please find your Canadians and don't let go. The second one is developing your skills. I used to be a chartered accountant in Bahrain, where I lived for a very long time. And then I was a music business executive in India for a few years and also worked in the comedy business there. So I think a lot of international people who come here, you've done a bunch of different things. Don't think that it's useless when you're here because you will use all of that in this wonderful industry of making TV and film. So rely on those skills and keep honing and developing them because they're not done. Even though I couldn't be staffed on TV when I first immigrated here because of the CAVCO and Canadian requirements, I was able to work on a set that was a digital series that got into Cannes series and a bunch of places. And it was an 80 person crew, like 100 cast members. And the learning that comes from being able to put something like that gave me all of the tools to then make my own show. Even though on that show I couldn't officially get a producer credit because of the CAVCO requirements, but it was fine because I got all the experience that then led me to make something of my own. Yeah, so I think that those are my top tips for surviving in this industry without PR. And always remember that it's a mind game. You need to keep making things. You need to keep like making it with people that are fun, that you like, and yeah, keep pushing forward. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Marushka. I totally second that. I mean, shameless for sure. You have to be shameless in our industry. You won't ask, you won't get. I feel like having moved here myself, like I think it's just when you ask, people are so forthcoming, and the whole notion of paying it forward, I really learned having moved to Canada as well, which I really resonate with. And find your tribe, like Marushka said, just find your people that you can really make some really great stories with. So that was really, really, really great. Thanks, Marushka. Um, Now we're going to wrap up everything, but thank you all of our finalists, for being with us today. We hope that as our audience, you found this session useful and that you will be able to join us tomorrow for our final session on the 21st, where we will explore production basics. The webinar will start promptly at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we would also like to thank CBC for hosting and planning partners CMPA and CAVCO for their continued support for the One Stop series. Again, we will send out a follow-up email which includes all of this, the documents with the takeaways and all of the links where you can watch, the old One Stop series from the couple of years. But there will also be an evaluation form. So it would be great if you could fill it out and we can learn from you about how to better give you the information that you need and want. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Shaista.
Thank you.